What the hell did I do now? All right, so as you can obviously see, I went and got a SupaRetroN HD, and I intended to buy one of these for a while. A few months back, I reviewed the RetroN HD NES clone console, and we went over it, and I'll post a link below to it. But I wanted to get the Super Nintendo version of it too, just to compare it. But I also wanted to have a backup console, so to speak, to be able to test games on, but more specifically, reproduction cartridges, clone cartridges, X and 1 cartridges, things like that. And the reason for that is because of the fact that a lot of these newer cartridges have ROM chips that accept 3.3 volts, but the original SNES, and I'm assuming the Hyperkin as well, outputs 5 volts because older ROM chips needed 5 volts. Now, if the cartridge is designed properly, it's going to be able to step down that voltage correctly, but a lot of clone cartridges don't do that. And immediately, you won't see any issues, but apparently long term, you can potentially have damage to the cartridge, the console, or both. And I really don't want to risk my SNES. So instead, what we're going to do is fire this up. We'll test it out, see how it plays games. I also want to take it apart and take a look at its guts. So let's get started. All right, so let's open the box up, take a look inside. So inside the box is the console, 2 controllers, and I'm assuming a host of cables, power, HDMI, etc. We'll take a look at the controller. It's definitely modeled on the original SNES controller, as you can see. A little bit of additional design to it. Hyperkin's little flare, the angled corners, although they're not as pronounced here because the SNES controller is already slightly rounded. But they did go with the North American color scheme here. Buttons feel okay, but I'm not a huge fan of the D-pad. It's feels a little soft. Start and select are nice and firm, and then of course, again, the YBXA buttons are nice. L and R a little clicky, although I don't think they're clicky buttons. I think they're membrane, but we'll see. Standard SNES plug. Of course, there's a second controller in here. And then we've got the main console. Keeps the overall color scheme of the North American SNES model. Purple, gray, darker gray. Same basic port layout in the back. USB power, HDMI, AV, and then 16:9 4:3 mode. On the bottom is the NTSC and PAL switch, so you can switch between the 2 different regions. And then, of course, your power, reset, and eject, which actually does have a working mechanism. I don't think I can actually capture it on here due to lack of light, but, or maybe, let's see. That's a little better. So yeah, there's the eject mechanism. So what else we've got here? We've got basic instruction manual, which who reads those? And then here we've got a package of cables, and they recommend operating with a 5-volt 1-amp USB wall charger. Don't use anything lower than that, and that's going to be true for most USB powered devices. So, but inside we've got an HDMI cable, which probably just a basic one. And then in this box here, bag AV cables, USB cable, just a little power brick. Let's get this cleaned up, and we'll open the console up and take a look. Okay, so let's attempt to take this apart. I'm guessing that everything is just under these rubber feet here. So, no weights or anything on it, but the console itself is fairly heavy. I'll compare it maybe later with the SNES. I don't have a scale or anything, but... So it looks like there's several boards. They didn't do a really good job of cleaning up the flux off, which is disappointing. And it actually looked like water damage, but it's not. But we'll take a look at it a little bit further and see. These just kind of pull up, pry up, just do it carefully. Let me pull the ribbon out. And looks like this is actually probably the main brains of it. It's the cartridge slot, and it's got the region switch on the bottom. And there's several different chips on here. But the chips that are on here is a TCT975, a TCT978, TCT976, some memory modules, I'm guessing a CIC type chip to be able to communicate with games in order to make them think it's a legit system. And yeah, I'm definitely going to have to look these up and see what they are. So this is definitely not an SNES on a chip type system. It looks like these just recreate the different chips in the SNES. But we'll march on further. So next one is going to be the AV board. And as you can see, it's a chip where they sanded off or masked off the identifications on them. But more than likely, this is just a standard HDMI encoder chip. Takes the AV input and converts it to HDMI. More than likely, these cloned chips or what have you, they probably don't do RGB out. They probably just do standard AV out, so it's going to convert the HDMI or the AV to HDMI. Now, it'd be nice if they actually did RGB out and converted that to HDMI. That'll give you a really nice crisp picture. That's one of the complaints that a lot of people have with these phone consoles, even if they have HDMI out, is that it still doesn't look quite that sharp. If you had an original SNES in Europe or Japan and you used SCART or I forget the Japanese equivalent, but you had RGB and you probably got a nice picture out of it. Us in North America weren't so lucky, although those in the retro community have rediscovered SCART, so to speak, and have gone forward to start utilizing it. And you can actually buy cables that can take the RGB signal in an SNES and convert it to HDMI and give you a really, really nice clean picture. And this is the controller board. Just a bunch of buttons and switches and a ribbon cable and some resistors. So, and the power LED, which is angled because Hyperkin, as they always do, have their little beveled edge with the H logo that lights up. I'm assuming in blue, but that's all there is to it. I'm really disappointed about the flex not being cleaned up, but what are you going to do? So that's the guts. I'm going to actually clean the flex off of this and put it back together, and then we're going to test out some games. Okay, I got everything wired up to this Asus monitor. I should make a note that the controller ports are very snug. Now, I am using the Hyperkin ones. I haven't tried an actual SNES controller yet, so I'm not sure if it's just maybe that the Hyperkin plugs are snug or if it's the socket or both. But maybe I'll give that a shot in a little bit. I will say, as far as the controller length goes, there are 8P cables, and the controller or the console's weight is roughly the same as an SNES Junior. I don't know how it will do with, how it compares to an original SNES, but, So we're going to go ahead and give a try with Mario World, or Mario All-Stars in the World, and let's get that set up. All right, so there's a boot screen of sorts. The volume's a little low on the monitor. I apologize. And it sounds okay. Doesn't seem to be any perceptible lag, although there might be a little bit. Now it's too dark to see the controller, so let's take a look and see. If there's any lag that's very minimal, I'm not noticing it. I'm not saying that you won't notice it, but I definitely don't notice. Now, I've also been playing emulators on PCs and other devices for many years. It's possible that I'm just attuned to lag. Others may not be so lucky. Now, in terms of overall image quality, I do have it in 16:9 mode, and I should switch that. It's not really sharp, but it's not really blurry either. Let me pause it here. Unfortunately, Mario's off screen, but let's see if we can zoom in a little bit. That's as close as I can zoom in. But I mean, if you look at the edges of the bush in the bottom right corner, it's a little bit of blurriness, but it's also, you can also still see the individual pixels. So it's, here, we'll have Mario here on screen, and it's, again, it's don't have super high expectations of the image quality. But again, these types of consoles are not designed for picky gamers. They're designed for people who maybe want to get back into it, don't want to bother with modding, don't want to bother with special cables and all this stuff. They want to go into the local game store, pick up, one of these, and go from there. Now, playing with the controller for a little bit, I still don't like the D-pad. I still think it's a little too soft, too light. The buttons, I do like the button presses. They do feel really good. I don't know. Like I said, it just feels light. It doesn't feel mushy. It feels too light to me. I am noticing though that the Y button, if I lift ever so slightly, and then push back down, it'll trigger. So it's not like the original controller, at least any of them that I've ever used, where I can kind of rest it and let go of the button a tiny little bit to leave a little bit of stress or anything like that. So on here it is a little more. It is a little bit more touchy, we'll say, but they feel good when you push down on them. So let's go ahead and try. Let's try the Super Game Boy in a Game Boy game to see if this will work with it. It does have the cartridge slot pins for them. We'll see if it actually works. We're gonna go with Donkey Kong Land since I just recently picked that up, and I want to see if this thing can play Super Game Boy games, and that is a Super Game Boy game. So it's not reading the cartridge, but I've had this issue before with the Super Game Boy. Let's see if I can reseat the cartridge. I do know that the game itself works, at least on an original Game Boy Color, and I also tested on the Game Boy Advance outside of the video and the GB Boy Color, so I know it works. There we go. Maybe. It's kind of reading the game, but it's kind of not. Might have to go back and re-clean these contacts again on the Super Game Boy. Then again, it could just be compatibility. It will have no trouble reading the ROM in the Super Game Boy, since it's just an SNES cartridge effectively that's telling the SNES how to interface with the rest of the Game Boy hardware. There we go. I don't hear any audio though, so that's a little troubling. But it does support the Super Game Boy colors, it does support the Super Game Boy borders and things like that, so there is a tiny bit of lag here. Maybe, a half a millisecond if I'm pushing down on A. Donkey Kong is jumping, but he's not jumping right away. Now that's interesting. I can hear the sound effect for changing the color palette. Although that's going to be a Super NES sound and not a Game Boy sound. Start select, exit a level. So it can at least kind of work, but there's no sound. And I don't know if that's due to a lack of hardware in the Super NES, if it has something to do with the cartridge slot itself. Again, the Super Game Boy had trouble booting a game up to begin with, so it could be something with the Super Game Boy. Let Let me try one more time, turning it off, maybe resetting the cartridge a few more times to clean the pins off on the Super Game Boy and see what happens. I will say that the cartridge slot on here is definitely a lot looser than the Hyperkin RetroN HD, the NES console version. That one is just like a death grip. This here, the cartridge goes in the way it should, and still no sound, unfortunately. Let me try another game, just in case. I will say I'm not a huge fan of the Hyperkin logo at startup. It does delay a little bit, but yeah, there is no sound. There is everything else is working, but no sound. So, and I've read about this with clone consoles before. I do believe that the Super NT Mini will play Super Game Boy correctly, will allow for sounds and all the enhanced features and everything, but that's an FPGA recreation. This particular console, it's not even SNES in a chip, and it's probably 95% accurate. It's probably not 100% accurate, or even 99% accurate, which would probably lead credence as to why sound isn't working. Now, maybe I'll pick up another Super Game Boy, one that doesn't seem to be as flaky, if I can locate one for a fair price, maybe, or maybe even a Super Game Boy 2, and try that in case it's my particular Super Game Boy that's acting up. Not sure. Next thing I want to try, though, is this guy. The reason I bought the SupaRetroN HD to try the clone console or clone cartridge so that I don't potentially damage my actual SNES. Except we're going to do that in a different video because I want to do a more proper review of the game itself. This is more of a review for the console. So I may add some extra footage at the end of maybe some direct HDMI capture. Not sure. Hopefully I will be able to have some time to put that in before this video comes out, and we'll go from there. And so, as I mentioned before, I'm going to put a little bit of game footage on with a direct capture so you can get a more accurate representation of the picture quality. Aiming a camera at a screen is one thing, but being able to see as close to a direct video feed as possible is another thing. So go ahead and put some footage out, and then we'll wrap this video up. So yeah, so this is definitely not a perfect recreation of the SNES, although I am pleased to see individual chips being cloned instead of just an SNES on a chip. It should technically make it a little bit easier to create revisions, though I really doubt that that's going to happen. It is what it is, but as you can see, it's playable otherwise, and you know, for the money, I mean, it was $75, I think, on Amazon. So it's not necessarily going to break the bank, but yeah, you can pick up a used SNES for a lot less in many cases. Might be a little dinged up, a little dirty, but not too big of a deal otherwise. But when you plug it into your television, unless you've got RGB cables, a SCART connection, or one of these RGB to HDMI cables that exist, you're not going to have a great picture at all. This picture is going to still be a little bit better. But to each his or her own. Again, this is not something necessarily designed for that hardcore gamer that wants the best of everything. For that, you really want to look at the analog Super NT. If you don't want to go original hardware, modding, special cables, etc. But overall, I'm impressed with it. For a casual gamer, you want to pick something up to have maybe at a summer home, or you want to have something, maybe, if your parents are divorced and you don't want to keep dragging your consoles back and forth, or even just to have in a collection, it's not that, bad of a pickup. So, but I'm going to wrap this up. This video's already going on longer than I wanted it to. If you liked it, hit the thumbs up. If you didn't, hit the thumbs down, but leave a comment below as to why, so I can try to make improvements in future videos. Thanks all, and I'll catch you later.